It's the Devy Digest powered by League Winners. I'm Andy, and we're talking the G5. I have a guest today. We cover all this and more after the intro. What is going on, everyone? We're talking the G5 today, so I had to get the Hive. My guest today is Justice, one half of the G5 Hive. Justice, what's going on, man?
Oh, not much. Enjoying some March Madness, doing some work for my own podcast today. So yeah, not much. Other than that, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. I appreciate you hopping aboard and talking some G5 guys. Now, typically when I have people on, I want to kind of get to know them and have our audience get to know them as well. One question that I always have is, what got you into creating content, and specifically for you, how did you go about creating the G5 Hive podcast?
So, I'll start at the beginning. I've been playing college fantasy football probably for around 25 or so years now. So I've kind of always been interested in college football, a college football fan. I went to Old Dominion. I'm an alumni of Old Dominion. Just love everything about college football. So about 2 years ago, I was asked by Hollywood and Brock to become a co-host with them on the Devy IDP Grind podcast. So I was like, sure, sounds like fun. I joined them on that podcast. In late August of that year, I was asked to join the Campus to Canton team as their IDP specialist. Started producing college IDP content, some defensive tools, models, etc. And then last spring, I got to know my co-host of the G5 Hive, Luke. He was DMing me and asking me, basically asking me for help with some of his drafts and some of his leagues, and we just kind of grew a friendship. And he sprung on me. He's like, hey, I got this idea, and I'm wondering if you'd like to help me out with it. You like Old Dominion, you're a G5 guy. He goes, I want to do this series. If you're familiar with Bud Elliott's Summer School series, right? It's kind of what it is. But he doesn't talk about G5. He only talks P5. So basically, Luke says, hey, this is what I want to do, but I want to do it for the G5. And I was like, man, that's an awesome idea. That would be great. I said, but instead of just kind of doing this one-off kind of thing and us showing up for, April, May, and June, perhaps producing however many, teams we can get and then kind of going quiet again for a year, let's why not, start a weekly G5 podcast, right? Build towards this, right? And grow towards this. And so that's kind of how the G5 Hive started. And it was kind of late in the process when we got to that point. I want to say maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the season. But yeah, we started, I think, right before week 0 last year. And so, yeah, it's been going ever since.
Nice. I always love those behind the scenes stories of how, all these podcasts and all these stories, how they formatted. And it's always interesting to find out how they form. So that's pretty cool. Now, you guys recently released a huge piece of news that you guys are doing. Do you mind recapping that for our listeners?
Yeah. So as I was saying earlier, we this idea of the summer school series, we call it the Worker Bee series. It's really the origin story of how the G5 Hive was born. And we announced it a couple weeks ago. It's where Luke and I sit down with the folks that know the G5 college football teams the best and do a deep dive with the teams they cover. In some cases, it's a beat reporter. Some cases, it's just a super fan, or even a student newspaper reporter that covers the team for the student newspaper. In some cases, we do have the actual folks from 24/7 that cover that team. So it kind of runs the gamut of folks, but we're looking for the kind of folks that can give us, a special insight into that team that most people don't normally have. We currently have lined up around 45 or so of the 64 G5 college football teams. We're working every day to try to get to them all. We do these interviews once spring practice is over. Some cases they may take place after the second transfer portal period, but we talk about offensive and defensive personnel, recruiting, coaching changes, NIL, transfer portal, just trying to get to know the teams better and get valuable information for our listeners. We have 2 episodes currently available now, Hawaii and Liberty. They're available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. As I was telling you pre-show, we just recorded our newest episode last Friday with Air Force. That will be released this coming Friday, March 29th. But pretty soon we're going to get to the point with spring games and such. We're going to be doing multiple a week. So, yeah, really, really exciting stuff and great content for everybody.
Nice. That should be very fun. And I'm looking forward to listening to one with the Air Force. The first 2 episodes were really great information. And like you said, it covers everything, offense and defense. So it's not just fantasy related. It's actually football related. So
it is. It really is. And I mean, it's just great content for a college football fan, right? Obviously, there's useful information as someone that plays, college fantasy or Devy or, a C2C league, whatever. There's definitely useful information in there, but it's just great information just in college football in general.
Yeah, so that is pretty interesting that you guys are doing. We'll talk more about that later on at the end, but you ready to talk some G5, guys?
Sure, absolutely. Let's go.
All right. So how I kind of figured I would break this down would be into 3 kind of segments. The first one would be G5 guys that can become Devy assets. So Justice, we'll start from there. Who are some guys that you think might become some Devy assets?
So the first thing I want to say is I am not what I like. Projecting NFL talent is definitely not my area of expertise, especially on the offensive side. There are people in the space way smarter than me. But I'll kind of share my thoughts and kind of what I go through when I do it. I would say in general, betting on a G5 player for NFL stardom is just not a great idea, right?
Yeah.
The odds just aren't in your favor. But there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. That it's going to happen. But as a rule of thumb, when I'm, looking at a G5 guy, I'm pretty much strictly looking at him as a college asset only, and whatever I get from the NFL is just bonus. But I think the first kind of place to look at is kind of what I would call the low hanging fruit, if you will, and that's looking at guys that have that P4 pedigree, that may have dropped down to the G5 for a variety of reasons. The type of players I'd be talking about here would be like Caden Salter at Liberty, Malachi Nelson at Boise State, Chris Marshall, Boise State, Ricky White, UNLV, Mario Williams at Tulane. Chances are all those guys I mentioned, with the exception of Chris Marshall, might be already picked up, right? But folks might have gotten frustrated when they dropped them, whatever. And Chris Marshall is probably someone that was dropped, I would assume, last year in most leagues, right? He's had 2 chances at the P5, hasn't worked out, but he certainly has the talent and that pedigree, and maybe he can, get things on the up and up there in Boise State. So those are kind of the low hanging fruit, I think, to look at those type of individuals. And then even there, there's no guarantees. Folks drop down all the time with that pedigree. And they don't even become G5 stars, So, but that's kind of, I feel like, the first, I don't know, crop of folks that I would be looking at if I'm looking from a pure Devy aspect. Then after that, I think you kind of look at, who are the top, folks in those positions in the G5, or folks that have a potential to be in those top groups. So for me, at quarterback, you're looking at Seth Hennigan at Memphis, right? Had a great year last year. Byron Brown, South Florida. Jalen Rayner, Arkansas State, right? Those two, Byron Brown and Jalen Rayner, offer, some mobility. I don't know that they have NFL level arms, right? but they offer that athleticism that sometimes will get you noticed, right? You look at Anthony Richardson from last year, Jaden Daniels from this year, right? Those weren't the first guys that kind of get talked about when you thought about the quarterback classes, but because of their legs, because of their athleticism, you've seen them kind of get pushed up. So those are some quarterbacks. Some running backs I would be looking at would be Mekhi Hughes at Tulane, um, uh, Breezy Dubar at Boise State. So he's not someone that's going to be in the limelight this year in terms, because Ashton Jeanty's still there, but he's kind of that next man up. And Boise State running backs always seem to find a place in the NFL. Another is Ontario Brown from Northern Illinois. He was a pretty high level recruit for them. So, those are three running backs, some receivers. DeCorian Clark at UTSA was injured all of last year, coming back this year. He will have to do it with the new quarterback, so we'll kind of see how that goes. Wide receiver Pofele Ashlock at Hawaii had an outstanding redshirt freshman season, and then another freshman that kind of came on pretty strong towards the end of the year, and kind of expecting big things and probably a potential breakout for this year is Amari Thomas at UAB. So those are some of the players I think that are primed to potentially break out and maybe get some NFL potential. But again, that's not. It's a tall order to ask, tall mountain to climb for those guys. But
Yeah, and those are some great list of names. And there's some names I kind of want to talk about that you had mentioned. First is Seth Hennigan, quarterback for Memphis. For me, he's always been that guy that's always been a fringe Devy guy for me. I see the arm talent that I like from there. You always kind of wonder the competition. You always wonder if he can read and process better defenses. So, with this upcoming season with Memphis and possibly with that 12 team, playoff team with a G5 kind of getting a slot, if Memphis can somehow work their way in and Seth Hennigan can kind of show himself against these better defenses, he has a chance to be maybe a round 2, round 3 quarterback at the next level. So I do love that mention. As far as Malachi Nelson, what I want to ask you about him is, do you, and we're just talking about projections here, do you think he is one of those guys that's going to spend 1 year at Boise and then hope to kind of rebound back to the Power Four? Or do you think he'll kind of stick around there for a couple of years?
I think I don't know. Like I could see any of those scenarios playing out. But the fact that he had the foresight, in my opinion, to say, "Hey, let me go here, try things out." Obviously, there was an attraction there. I could see him kind of having some more loyalty and staying there more than a year for sure. I mean, the bottom line is, if you're talented enough, the NFL is going to find you, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know that he would necessarily. I mean, obviously, if he has goes gangbusters, and if he was to do that in the SEC, that's going to be looked at differently. But especially, I feel like at the quarterback position, man, like I think they get the benefit of the doubt more than any other position. So I don't know. I get the sense that maybe he's going to be there for like 2 years, but you never know.
Yeah, and then kind of sticking to Boise, I do love that call with running back Jamries Dubar. I think he's a very talented runner. I am a fan of Utah State. I do some content articles through them, and so last year when I was watching Utah State and Boise, and I was watching him play, I'm like, this guy's got juice. If Ashton Genty gets hurt or they want him to be limited, they don't want him to get 200 plus carries, he's someone that can electrify this upcoming season. So I
Yeah.
do like that call. Another running back that you had mentioned is Tulane's Mekhi Hughes. With Tulane and then them getting the Troy head coach, they love to run the ball. So Mekhi Hughes can definitely get possibly 13, 1,400 yards. So that could be a
Yeah.
fun offense as well. One thing I want to talk about is with UTSA. You had mentioned DeClorian Clark. It came out that he had another surgery, but he should be clear by I want to say I think it's like end of spring, I think. But who would you rather have for UTSA? Would you rather have DeClorian Clark or Devin McEwen as your wide receiver there?
Oh, I mean, I guess it depends on which format you're in, right? They brought in a couple transfers too.
Yeah, DJ
Was it DJ
Allen,
Allen from TCU?
TCU.
So I don't know, like McEwen, maybe definitely like in a dynasty format. McEwen's probably the one. Quarterback play does concern me a little bit. Um, And so I wouldn't be shocked, like if they were to bring in a quarterback in that second portal window. But I guess today, if you told me, man, it's tough because of Clark's injury history, right? But if I think he's healthy, I'd probably lean Clark.
That makes sense. And then with Hawaii, with Profela Ashlock, he's been a favorite of mine since week 0 of last year. He just does everything well. And I'm looking forward to this upcoming season, with Timmy Chang's modern day run and shoot, third year into that system. It should be fun. And Hawaii definitely has every chance to make a bowl game this year. So I do like those names that you had mentioned. The second kind of grouping that I had was new potential breakout G5 players. Who are some guys that you think could possibly break out this year?
All right. So most of these, I would say I'm thinking of a breakout from a college production standpoint, right? They may or may not have any NFL potential, but we'll start with quarterbacks first. Devin Dampier at New Mexico, with Bronco Mendenhall coming on board. Dampier, as a freshman last year, showed a lot of promise, played really well. He is a mobile quarterback. We know how Bronco Mendenhall likes to use those mobile quarterbacks. The biggest concern I have with New Mexico is the offensive line. I think they lose all their starters. They lose a couple of top backups. So it's going to be a key for them to kind of rebuild that offensive line. And if they can do that, Dampier could have an outstanding year in that offense. Quarterback Matt Sluka coming over from Holy Cross, going to UNLV. If you're not familiar with Sluka, he ran, I want to say, for almost 1,500 yards a year ago, 1,200 the year before. Another mobile option. Unfortunately for him, he is not there in the spring. So, he's going to have to win that job in the fall. But I think he can do that. And, it'd be exciting to kind of see him in that UNLV offense. Quarterback Giovanni Lopez, South Alabama. We got to see him a little bit last season. Another mobile quarterback. South Alabama just started spring practice, but I just read an article last week from the beat reporter that basically said Lopez is going in as the QB1, and I don't really necessarily see where they would go away from him. He's a different option from Carter Bradley, right? Carter Bradley was, the more, stand in the pocket, kind of pocket passer quarterback. Lopez definitely is a lot more mobile. So he's an interesting option. And then these last two guys are guys that, for the quarterbacks anyway, are guys that kind of fit that mold I was talking about earlier, possibly of the low-hanging fruit, where they were, high recruits. They were at P5 programs, and now they're in the G5. The first is A.J. Duffy, going to San Diego State. He was at Florida State. He's going to be in that Sean Lewis offense. He's got an opportunity to take that quarterback one. We've seen Sean Lewis quarterbacks be productive for college, and so if he can win that job, then I expect wheels up for him. He's also fairly mobile. And then the last quarterback is Jay Butterfield at San Jose State. He's been there. This will be his second year at San Jose State. He was previously at Oregon, but San Jose State has a whole new coaching staff. Their new OC, Craig Stutzman, The I believe he calls his offense the spread and shred. Um, and so, they're gonna pass for a lot of yards. And so if Butterfield was to win that job, I could see him having a nice year too at San Jose State.
Yeah, I do like those guys. Now, with Devin Dampier, what I do like about him is he is a really good runner, but he also, in the limited opportunities that he had to pass the ball, he showed that he can pass the ball pretty well. And with New Mexico, they're going to be looking for that new signal caller. So I do like him. Gio Lopez, I think it is rocket ships for him. And, with Major Applewhite getting promoted, being the head coach there now, I think it's all systems go for Gio Lopez. And yeah, we all know if we can get a Sean Lewis quarterback, definitely go get him. And it does look like AJ Duffy is going to be the guy there. Do you have any other positions?
I do. I have a list of running backs and receivers.
Okay.
So moving to the running backs, the first one kind of a little bit fits the mold of the low hanging fruit, but not necessarily because they didn't have the recruiting pedigree. And that's Mario Anderson at Memphis. He came to South Carolina in the SEC last year, moving up a division. But he proved he could play, right? Especially towards the end of the year. He was the guy getting the run for South Carolina there. And so I think dropping down to Memphis, I think, I look for him to have an outstanding year. They lose Blake Watson. I'm not quite sure he'll be used as much as Watson was in the passing game, but he can definitely fill that void from the running game. The next guy we already mentioned, I mentioned in the last segment, and that I call him Breezy because that's his nickname, but Breezy Dubar at Boise State. Running back Ricky Hunt, Ohio. We got a glimpse of him in the bowl game, and they lose quite a bit through the portal and graduation. So if he's to win that job, they're replacing a lot of pieces in Ohio. Quarterback, running back, and so excited to kind of see what he can do in Ohio. Running back Kanye Roberts at App State. They lost Nate Noel through the portal. App State, always has a stable of great running backs, and Kanye Roberts kind of looks to be the next one in line there. And then another guy moving down from the P5, and that's Zach Evans from Minnesota going to North Texas. North Texas lost quite a bit in their running back room with transfers, and so I think Zach Evans is, just from attrition alone, probably looks like to be the one. Forget his pedigree and how he looked at Minnesota. He looks kind of be the one to kind of lead that running room there for North Texas.
Yeah, I do like those names. And I do think Ricky Hunt is someone to watch. He had to pretty much wait his turn, and once all those guys have left, he's the guy there, and he could easily be one of those, next guy in line to get 1,000 yards, 15 touchdowns, to kind of go the Penny Boone route, and then eventually kind of transfer up. So that could be an interesting name to watch. So who are your receivers that you have listed?
So the first one is one that you mentioned in the last segment, is Devin McEwen at UTSA. They've in the past been pretty prolific in terms of passing the ball, but they do have to replace that quarterback, as I said earlier, and they also brought in some transfers. Wide receiver Jalen Moss, Fresno State, kind of looks like the next star receiver for them. He's been moved to the slot in the spring, and that's kind of the favored receiver there in that offense. So, he last year was him and Eric Brooks, and then he kind of took over there for a little bit of the season in terms of being that lead dog. So he's moving to the slot where Brooks was last year, and look for an outstanding season for him with Mikey Keene returning, Amari Thomas, UAB, who I already mentioned earlier. And then next, I'm kind of going to go through some positions. We don't know who these guys are going to be, but these are positions to pay attention to. The outside receiver at San Diego State. Is that going to be Nate Bennett? Is it going to be Balin Brooks? Is it going to be Lewis Brown coming over from Colorado State? We don't know those answers today, but hopefully once we get done with spring practice, we'll kind of have a better idea. Nate Bennett's a transfer from, I believe, Portland State. Balin Brooks was a freshman last year at San Diego State who actually got some buzz under the old regime. And I've read some positive things so far this spring. And then Lewis Brown came over from Colorado State, who had some great games for Colorado State last year. So just kind of pay attention to see who are those outside guys for San Diego State. And then San Jose State, the slot wide receiver. If you look at Craig Stutzman's history, it's the slot wide receiver is the guy that eats consistently on a year-to-year basis. And I really don't know who that's going to be. Most of the receivers you think about when you think about San Jose State are guys that played outside. Nick Nash, he's been an outside receiver in the past. Justin Lockhart, outside receiver. They bring in a transfer and Trayshawn Hurry. He's an outside receiver. So I'm not really sure even just who's are they going to move one of those guys to the slot or not. I don't know. But pay attention to the slot guy there at San Jose State. Moving on to another name that when we did our G5 Hive Worker Bee Series interview with Liberty, the John Manson from A Sea of Red, he told us to look out for Dante Lee at Liberty. That they think Dante Lee was kind of brought in to be that lead X guy. Might take him, a little bit. He's moving up in a division, but that's kind of the hope is that Dante Lee will be the next CJ Daniels, if you will. Probably not this year, but maybe eventually for Liberty. I actually just saw you. I think you had just recently tweeted something about Micah Davis and Utah State. So the Utah State slot receiver, like we want to find out who that is. We know Terrell Vaughn's going to be on the outside. Unfortunately, in the case of Micah Davis, he's still recovering from the foot surgery he had towards the end of last year, so he's not there for spring practice. I've kind of wondered if they would move Micah Davis to the slot. I haven't seen anything, I haven't heard anything about that, but I just felt like maybe they would just to kind of get him more touches, right? So kind of stay tuned to see if it's Micah Davis as who's going to be a slot receiver, or are they going to leave him outside and someone new is going to step up in that slot spot for Utah State, because it has been very productive in the past. And then the wide receiver one for Florida International from a fantasy perspective, and even these guys have kind of gone off for 1 year and then moved up to the P5. Tyrese Chambers moved up, had outstanding years for Florida International, moved up to Maryland. Chris Mitchell last year had an outstanding season for Florida International. He's up to Notre Dame. So kind of trying to figure out maybe who that Florida International wide receiver one is. Dean Patterson returns. He's probably the top returning guy. And then a guy that I've seen get some praise recently is a redshirt freshman by the name of Luby Maurice Jr. So just kind of pay attention to that spring practice for Florida International to kind of see if you can kind of get an inclination of who that wide receiver one is going to be for them.
Yeah, and I think that's all some interesting names to kind of take down. One name that I kind of want to bring up in the one room is Jalen Moss for the name. I absolutely love Jalen Moss's game with Fresno State. I think he definitely is going to be the guy to take that next step there. I can honestly see him getting 80 plus receptions this coming season, just breaking out and being that next sensation for them and be the guy that Mikey Keene kind of leans on in that receiving room. And I do like that he takes over the slot position. So I do think that is a great name that you had mentioned. One room is that Utah State room. And yeah, it is interesting with Micah Davis and what they're going to do, because during his time at Air Force, he was kind of used as that wide back. So he is kind of familiar with that slot type role. And then when Utah State used him last year, when they used him in the slot, he wasn't as productive. And it wasn't until they moved him out wide is when he found kind of his niche. So I'm with you. That's my biggest mystery with Utah State and what they're going to do, because Micah Davis really seemed to find a home at that boundary position. But if you take a look at that room, they don't really have anybody that can play in the slot. I mean, they have two guys that really haven't had any production that kind of fit that twitchy mold. So are you going to really lean on guys that you don't really know, or are you going to move Micah Davis in and then hopefully use one of those maybe like a Kobe Bowman or one of those other guys as a boundary receiver. So that is a room that I'm kind of interested to see how it shapes up.
One guy I know that they brought in, and a lot of people, at least in the college fantasy side, have kind of been hyping up recently, is Robert Freeman, and he kind of fits that mold that you're talking about. But it's still early in practice. They literally just started practicing last week, and early on anyway, he's practicing with the fourth team. So does that mean he's not going to be the starting slot receiver? No. And it's kind of where you'd expect him to be. He's a newcomer, right? But I think it's just kind of someone to monitor. Maybe he's someone that can step in that slot role, but it's probably a little too early to be declaring him the next Terrell Vaughn at this point,
Yeah.
or Devin Tompkins. But he's definitely someone that could potentially move into that role as a newcomer to Utah State.
Yeah, and then with that Utah State room, it'll definitely be led by Jalen Royals. Now, the final kind of little section that I broke it down to were true freshman G5 gems. Now, these are ones that we're probably going to miss on, but Justice, what are some names that you think might break out?
Yeah, as we were talking before the show, like it's just it's really hard, especially even before spring practice, to talk about true freshmen. So, kind of what I tried to do was look at guys that maybe where, at least for the quarterbacks and the running backs, have some opportunity in those rooms. And so, starting with the quarterback, the first quarterback I wanted to mention was Adrian Posse at UAB. He is an early enrollee, so he's there for spring practice. He was a three-star, number 84 quarterback in the class, and he had originally committed to Auburn before he decommitted when Brian Harsin was fired and Hugh Freeze came on board there. He also had offers from Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, LSU, Miami, Notre Dame, among others. So he had some pretty good P5 offers, and Jacob Zeno's not going to be around forever, and so maybe he's someone that can kind of move into that role. Obviously not this year, but maybe next year. We talked about this gentleman before the show. That's Micah Alejado at Hawaii. He was also an early enrollee, and he was there for spring practice. And he got most of the looks with John Gawa Sagapulutele. Those are the two young guys there at Hawaii. They got most of the looks in that spring game or spring showcase, if you will. And they both had their moments in that game. Alejado's also a three-star, came from powerhouse Bishop Gorman. I think he was the 2022 Max Preps National Junior of the Year, played in the Polynesian Bowl this year. His stats in high school were very impressive. 125 touchdowns, only 4 interceptions. Like that's crazy, right? And so maybe he's someone that's going to step in once Braden Shaker moves on into that run and shoot offense there in Hawaii. And then the last quarterback is someone that you and I also mentioned previously, and we heard about on our Worker Bee series with Liberty, and that was quarterback Jaden Bradford. He is also an early enrollee. He was there for spring practice, 3-star, number 59 overall. And he's the highest quarterback recruit ever from high school that Liberty's ever gotten. A lot of people say, well, Caden Salter is probably higher, which is true, but they didn't get Salter directly from high school. But he comes over from IMG Academy, which is a football factory. He had offers from South Carolina, Louisville, Missouri, NC State, Penn State. So he had quite a few high-level P5 offers. But Coach Chadwell seemed to be very impressed with him during the spring. I have a quote here from an article that I read that Coach Chadwell says, Jaden is very intelligent. He is coming in not like a typical guy because he understands offensive quarterback. He understands play systems. He knows our system pretty well already as a young guy, which is very hard to do. We've been really pleased and impressed with that. As you can see, he has a nice calmness to him in the pocket. He kind of stays in there. He goes through his reads, and he makes plays with people. He's got a chance to be a really, really good player. He's got a lot of learning to do still and growing and needs to get stronger. But we're certainly excited about his future, and he showed some of that ability today. He was talking about the spring game where Jaden Bradford got to play a little bit there. And then the last quarterback that I want to mention, and this one, you might have to wait some time for him unless he just wows us and takes off in year one, or the aforementioned AJ Duffy doesn't do like we expect. But that's Danny O'Neal down at San Diego State. He's also an early enrollee there. He was there for spring practice. 3-star, number 40 quarterback in the class. He was originally committed to Colorado, but obviously, like he really liked Sean Lewis because he followed Sean Lewis over to San Diego State. He was in the Elite 11 finals. High school, he had almost 8,000 yards and 98 touchdowns, completing over 62% of his attempts. But he also had 1,300 yards rushing and 27 rushing touchdowns. So, he's kind of like handpicked there by Sean Lewis. So it wouldn't surprise me, right? Like if AJ Duffy just kind of doesn't perform as expected, that Danny O'Neal doesn't kind of move in there and take over that role for the foreseeable future.
I think those are all great names that you mentioned, especially now with, I mean, with true freshmen, you don't really expect any of them to hit their very first year, especially at quarterback. But these are great names to know for the 2025 season and beyond. Do you have any other guys to mention at other positions?
Yeah. So running back, kind of a theme that we've been talking about for running backs is Boise State, right? So they bring in Dylan Riley. He's also an early enrollee. He's been there for spring practice. He ran track in high school. He's fast. Ran a 10.76 in the 100-meter dash. Super productive in high school with over close to 5,000 yards and almost 50 touchdowns. So is he going to get any run this year? Maybe a little bit, right? But like you said, JT could get injured. Dubar could get injured, and we could see more of Dylan Riley. But again, probably he's more of a play for 2025. Another early enrollee is Jalen Washington at Southern Miss. Southern Miss, they lose Frank Gore Jr., and there's just not a lot there other than Rodriguez Clark, who's there for his final year, and Kenyon Clay. So, him being there early for spring practice with some opportunity. And then the other thing I noticed was the Southern Miss beat writer has him third on the depth chart pre-spring, right? So, that just kind of shows you that the opportunity is there and available for him. So kind of excited to kind of see what he can do, and glad that he's an early enrollee, because I think that seems to be a key, like for a lot of the freshman breakouts, right? Is that they were there for the spring. And then the last running back is kind of an interesting one, and that's Duncan Brune from Ohio. So he's also an early enrollee. He's there for spring practice. But what makes this story interesting is he comes from Germany. He ran track over in Germany. His mother was a member of the German Olympics. She was a 4-time Olympian in swimming. Duncan, while he was there in Germany, he trained with the German national bobsled team. So yeah, like, I don't know, it's an interesting story, and just sounds like a hard worker, someone that's probably going to be very, very strong. And that, as we mentioned, that Ohio running back room, there's plenty of room for opportunity behind Ricky Hunt there, with Cy Ben-Gur going off to Minnesota, and O'Shawn Allison, I believe, graduated out of eligibility. So, just another potential guy there for that Ohio running back room.
And then one thing I think everyone listening has probably gathered is Boise is going to be a very talented team this year. I think we've mentioned a lot of their guys in this series so far. Who are some wide receivers that you think might break out as a freshman?
So a lot of these guys, I think you're probably more looking to the future. I don't know that you can expect anything from them for this year. But Marshall Sanders at Fresno State, he was a 3-star. A kid, had offers from Washington, Colorado, Arizona State, California. He had 2,000-yard seasons in high school. He's kind of someone to maybe pay attention to this fall and next spring, to kind of see how he looks. To see if he can kind of crack that starting lineup in 2025. And then Miles Coleman at North Texas. Another 3-star kid. He's not there for the spring, and he's on the small side, but man, the kid's fast. I think he's like 5'6", 155. He ran track. His best time in the 100-meter was 10.59. He had 2,000-yard seasons in high school, and looks like a few potential future slot receiver for North Texas in that wide open offense there. But again, it's probably more play, down the line. And then wide receiver Carmelo Mays at Georgia Southern. He is an early enrollee there, so maybe we'll hear some about him in the spring. He played basketball, ran track, 3-star kid, had 1,000-yard season. And kind of where I heard about him was I was listening to a Georgia Southern fan podcast, and they mentioned that he ran a 4.340.
Oh, wow.
And so, I tried Googling it, tried to verify that. I couldn't find anything that said that. But that made me kind of take notice, right?
Yeah.
If he has that kind of speed, man, like, and there's certainly some opportunity there at Georgia Southern this year, right? With Caleb Hood moving on. So just someone to kind of pay attention to there at Georgia Southern. And then the last guy, who, I mean, I think I wish he was there for spring because I could see him, potentially maybe getting some playing time this year. And that's Alex Green at Tulsa. 3-star had offers from Northwestern, Tulane. He ran track. His fastest time in the 100-meter was 10.6. But man, he played at Hutto High School in Texas, 6A, the highest level there in Texas. And his senior year, 101 catches for over 2,000 yards. Like, that's got to make you stand up and take notice, right? So, again, someone that I wish he was there for spring, but definitely a name to kind of pay attention to moving forward for Tulsa.
Yeah, and with Alex Green, to kind of mention what you were saying, he only had one Power 4 offer, and that was with Northwestern. And I feel like every year there's always a handful of guys in Texas and Florida that the services just simply miss on because there's just so many talented guys. And I think Alex Green is one of them. I think Tulsa got an absolute steal there. The Tulsa wide receiving room is also very open, so he can definitely make some headway and get some playing time as a true freshman. One guy that I want to mention that I also mentioned pre-show, this is a guy that I'm really high on. He is my overall #1 rated G5 guy for the running back position, and that is DJ Williams for Ball State. He won't be an early enrollee, so he won't get in until the summertime, but with Ball State, currently, as we're recording this, they have a wide open running back room with Marquise Cooper in the portal. Maybe goes to San Diego State, maybe not, who knows. But as of right now, DJ Williams, even though he's not coming in until the summertime, he could have a clear pathway of being an instant impact true freshman. Now, Justice, I do appreciate you coming aboard and hopping on here. This was a fantastic episode. You gave us some great names for us here, and we're going to have to keep track of them, follow them, see how they do. And I really enjoy talking to you. Now, where can people find you on X? What are you currently working on? What you got going on here?
Sure. So you can find me on X at justice_2318. If you're interested in the IDP work that I do, you can find that over at Campus to Canton. I'm currently working on a sacks production model. Last year I did a tackle production model for college. So I'm kind of doing the same thing for sacks and pressures. Hopefully that'll be available soon. And then also I'm on the Devy IDP Grind podcast where we strictly talk college IDP. If you're looking for more G5 information, definitely check out the G5 Hive podcast. It's a weekly podcast that we do covering G5 college football, but also geared towards college fantasy. And then, like we mentioned before, our Worker Bee series, right? That's just great information for anybody, whether you play college fantasy football or you're just a football fan and want to be more educated on these G5 college football teams. We're interviewing folks that know the G5 teams the best. They're packed with loads of information. As I've said previously, Hawaii and Liberty are available now. Air Force will be available in the very near future, and then it just kind of goes gangbusters from there as spring practice wraps up.
And then everyone can follow the G5 Hive at the G5 Hive. I strongly consider you following them on X and listening to the podcast in the Worker Bee series. It is a fantastic series that any college football fan would truly enjoy. Now, we'll be back next time, but before we go, if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and you can follow me at Andy_fam1. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, give us a rate and review, and we'll see you next time on the Devy Digest.